Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where we would also like to coach Ole Miss for the rest of the season. I'm Brendon, Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Ben Axelrod, senior editor at Awful Announcing. We're back. It's Monday, December 1st. Hit follow, hit subscribe. If you're finding us for the first time, if you are back and ready for more media news and analysis, you're in the right place. We're here for you 3 times a week. Today, Tom Brady is getting better, just like we all thought, but maybe never expected to actually happen. Plus, some WWE talk at the very end. But first, Lane Kiffin going to Baton Rouge, the move that was expected, but very heavily delayed and discussed along the way. Ben, this entire college football week got swallowed up by Lane Kiffin. That's happened before. We'll get into all the ins and outs of how it was covered at ESPN and across the media landscape. A little bit of a stock watch, as we like to do here. But you've been in this game longer than me. Where does this rank in terms of the Lane circuses that have come and gone through the years in your mind? Because this is nothing new for this man, even though the profile of the LSU job might be a little bigger than some of the others.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember all of the Lane stuff. I mean, I remember when he was the offensive coordinator at USC during the Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart years, and then everything that happened with the Raiders, everything that happened with Tennessee, then him going to the USC and the wheels just kind of fell off there, and he wound up on this kind of redemption arc. I think the Tennessee one, him leaving Tennessee for USC after one season, that was like just pre-social media. The Raiders stuff was definitely pre-social media, and it's still like, I don't know how much blame he shares in the Raiders stuff. I don't know how much of it was just Al Davis being Al Davis. Like, that was a little more just his name was in the news as opposed to him taking a lot of shit. The Tennessee stuff, he took a lot of shit for because he arrived at Tennessee. He talked a lot of shit. He called out Urban Meyer, accused them of cheating, had this year at Tennessee where I think they went like 7-5, but it was like a promising 7-5. That was a program that was really kind of looking for a resurgence. And then he up and leaves them after 1 year. I think that and how that came together, that would have been crazier had it been like fully in this social media era. But this was really the first like full on Lane controversy that had the social media aspect of it. And, all things considered, I think like it was a pretty, other than, the messy timeline, which I think you could point to the college football calendar as taking a lot of blame there. It was a pretty traditional, like, coach leaves school type of story, aside from the fact that he's leaving a playoff team. But like, he wasn't, taking these visits. His family was going on these fact-finding visits. But it was not like Lane going up there and making it clear he was searching. I thought Lane actually handled himself fairly well, at least compared to how he's being portrayed through all this. But I think this will be the one now that sticks to his name. This is what, when you think of Lane Kiffin, you'll think about him leaving an Ole Miss team that's about to play in the playoff for LSU. And we'll see how it goes at LSU, because he could either become the next Nick Saban at LSU, or he could flame out as quickly as Brian Kelly did. It's going to be really interesting.
I'm partial to him getting fired on the tarmac after losing to my beloved Sun Devils. That one is a different place in my heart. But yeah, I mean, I think you add the Thanksgiving week of it to, the list of reasons why this one took over, and obviously all the 24/7 coverage and content that you highlighted there. It definitely just became the biggest story of the college football regular season, I would say, without a doubt. It's now done, and Ole Miss will continue its season. We'll see what that looks like. We'll get to, again, ESPN, Kirk Herbstreit, what he said, all the sort of behind the scenes machinations, where I think if you were to criticize Lane and his camp, that might be where you would do it. But there were a few things about the coverage of this that felt a little bit ridiculous. And I'll just start with the basic one, which is, I feel like the kind of, performative naivete of why leave Ole Miss for LSU?
Right.
What's the difference? The money's the same. It's like, well, it's LSU and Ole Miss. So I think I feel like that kind of answers the question, like prior to Lane ever getting here, I don't think, and the success he helped, instill there, and maybe you could say took the program to a new level or whatever, however you feel, that would have never been a debate, right? If you were to just the guy who coaches Arkansas was up for both of these jobs, it'd be clear which one he should take, right? I understand loyalty, blah, blah, blah. I get why an Ole Miss fan might say that, but a national observer, that just felt ridiculous. The answer is obvious. It's LSU.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I always have these like debates, like what's the best job in college football? I think it's Ohio State. I think it's LSU. I think it's Texas. Like, I think those are the three best jobs. And I don't even know what order. Like, I'm biased. I think it's Ohio State. They've been nationally relevant my entire lifetime. But I think like when you look at resources and recruiting base, which I think are the two things you would think matter most, and obviously history and tradition and all that, like it's tough to beat LSU. Like LSU, you can just recruit the state of Louisiana and have a national title contender year in and year out. It is kind of funny, like everything that went down with their governor making a big show of saying we're never going to have a contract like the one Brian Kelly had, and then you go out and hire Lane Kiffin and sign him to this contract that's basically the same contract. That's pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like the idea that like once LSU enters the picture, like LSU is probably going to get the guy. Like LSU is one of the top, at worst, top 5 best jobs in all of college football. And yeah, I mean, Ole Miss, we're talking about this being the best era of Ole Miss football, and it's, it involves their head coach leaving. So I agree. I think naivete is a great word to describe that.
We're in this period too with college football coverage where I think referring to NIL becomes this really broad, generalized explanation for everything. Mm-hmm. You just kind of gesture toward, with how things are now, or, with NIL and the transfer portal, it's like this crutch of commentary where no one feels the need to actually explain how that has impacted the situation that they're talking about in the news. And I think one of these is, I keep hearing it explained that the increased turnover of coaches and the rising salaries of coaches can somehow be traced back to NIL. And I just have a really hard time making that connection in a direct way. Am I wrong there? Because, I heard it when Franklin and Kelly got fired so early in the season. And I think this maybe links back to the calendar point that I was being brought up a lot that you kind of made there. And maybe there's something to be said for getting out in front of, the transfer portal and the recruitment cycle. And then when there's more turnover, that inherently, bolsters the market overall because there's more coaches kind of negotiating new contracts all the time. Like, I suppose I can understand that. But I think you're right. To me, this one just felt like LSU hired a bad coach or not a good fit, got tired of him, moved on, and hired the best candidate. Like, I don't actually think this one is really directly connected to NIL or the transfer portal or some of those things, in my opinion. This felt pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of in terms of like why we're seeing this uptick in firing coaches early or firing coaches mid-season is you do have boosters now with more skin in the game. Like if I'm a Penn State booster and Penn State's paying for the most expensive roster in all of college football, and then we're losing to UCLA and Northwestern, like I'm going to be more pissed than I was 5 years ago when I was just, paying for normal booster stuff. But when I'm like actually paying for a roster, maybe that does add incentive to like, let's pay this buyout. Let's get this coach out of here. But that's the only thing
I can think. Noise in general, like pressure on the AD, pressure on the university. I guess that's probably true. And again, I defer to you on a lot of this, but it just it's like, well, to me, I could also make a case that whatever booster interest there was, and obviously we know that there were payments to players going on prior that would have led to that level of interest happening, even if it wasn't obvious to us that coach salaries and coach changeover was the one place where a booster could have made their presence felt prior, And so if anything, like if I'm some kind of lower level booster now that might have only gotten in because I can do it legally and I can do it at a lower cost to me, then I guess those people, but like how much say do they have? I don't know. I really did just want to throw it out there because I'm not sure. But my main point is the media coverage. We got to get better than just saying, oh, because of NIL, because of the Wild West, like all these kind of new go-to phrases. We just use that to describe anything that happens in college sports all of a sudden. And I'm like, can you tell me how? Can you give me the why? But I think that does bring us to the ESPN side of this, because one of the more high-profile examples that we saw, the first real example of how the coverage was going to look, was on the broadcast of the Egg Bowl on Friday, where we kind of knew it might be Lane's last stand. We knew this ultimatum was going to, push was going to come to shove Saturday. The game ended up being a blowout. And for most of the fourth quarter, if not the second half, Dave Pasch and Dusty Dvorak on the call, they went through all these, things we're talking about, what was to blame, how it had all played out, the pros and cons of each decision that Lane could make, but very much came down on the side of playing up the Lane Kiffin as a victim part of this, right? That whether it's the calendar and some of the timing of things, or Ole Miss athletic director Keith Carter forcing his hand to make such a decision, or not being allowed to coach the team, the coloring of the commentary was very heavily like Lane is being put in this position. Lane Kiffin chose to take the LSU job here. Right. And also, like, I very intentionally started the conversation the way that I did, because this is a dude who is known for this. This is a dude who has a reputation for making these things messy. It felt crazy to me that in that platform, that would be the position that the announcers would take, especially people who aren't even in the opinion business. It felt, I don't know, intentional or pointed at the very least.
I think the crazy thing too that people are missing about all this, because I do think the calendar is a factor. Like, I'm not saying Lane is a victim, but to me, my thing is like, we agree this was a better job he took. If he wanted this, like, how else could he have done it? Like, how else could he have taken this job? Like, it's, to me,
you have to go to, LSU deciding to fire their coach when they did. And why did that happen? And then the position's open. So of course they're not just going to wait around to fill it. Like, I get that. That's fair.
Yeah. And so I do not fault Lane for taking the job. I think that is a reality of the college football calendar. I don't think this is going to be the last time we see this happen. I was looking throughout history. There are like 4 or 5 examples you could point to where this definitely would have happened had the playoff just been expanded or we not been in the BCS era. Like, there's some pretty obvious examples of coaches who would have had to have been faced with the same choice. This is the second year of the 12-team playoff. So there's an increased likelihood of this happening. But I think the thing that like people are missing with all this when it comes to the idea of letting him coach Ole Miss moving forward is that these are SEC rivals. Like, this is not John Summerall leaving Tulane for Florida. This is not Urban Meyer leaving Utah for Florida. This is not Scott Frost leaving UCF for Nebraska. Like, these are two teams who recruit in the same area, who play each other, who are like legitimate rivals. And so to bring this back to like NIL and the transfer portal, you're just going to let this guy hang around your team and hang around your players. And that was another thing that like I thought watching the Egg Bowl is, if I'm an Ole Miss fan, like, this sucks. Like, not only am I watching them talk about my coach leave, they're talking about the prospect of him taking the star quarterback with him. And so it's like, this just sucks if you're an Ole Miss fan. So I get that. I'm sympathetic to that, but I agree. Like, to me, like, if you want to say it's okay Lane left, if you want to criticize Lane for leaving a playoff team, whatever. I think you're entitled to either side of the opinion. I get both sides. But I think like where you do start into it being a little propaganda like is where you have Kirk Herbstreit saying Ole Miss needs to let him coach in the playoff. Like, to me, like that point when he's taking the job, I think the lines are drawn. And that's when it does become like, what are we even talking about here when we're talking about the idea of him finishing out the season with the team when he's already accepted the job as an SEC rival? Like, this is a guy who got fired from Alabama because he couldn't handle the responsibilities of being Alabama's national offensive coordinator heading into a national title game after he took the FAU job. How is he going to balance coaching Ole Miss in the playoff and putting together an LSU program that's going to be competing against Ole Miss at the
being
very
on
moment?
The phone with the governor for an hour every day or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. While taking staff with him. It's to me, it's like, okay, we're just like, this is fantasy talk now.
Yeah. I don't know of an example in my lifetime where that's happened in such a high profile circumstance ever. Like that, I understand so college football has its uniqueness, and we're talking about some of those things that make it unique, but I mean, extrapolate that out to any other sport or walk of life, and it would be preposterous. I mean, in our corner of this industry, we covered the YouTube Disney, not the TV carriage dispute, but the dispute over the executive who YouTube hired from Disney, and he had to sit on the sidelines, whatever, we can believe or not believe that actually happened, but he was legally required to like sit out that negotiation, which did become a very prolonged and public carriage dispute because he had negotiated on the Disney side of this for a while and now is working at YouTube. Like, you can't just do it because your buddies in the media really think you should. That's just not how this stuff works. I think every average fan would think that that's ridiculous if they've ever changed jobs or just understand the situation as it is. But yeah, whether it was Kirk or Booger McFarland, there were numerous examples of this on ESPN's air throughout the weekend, and almost every other national reporter or analyst or commentator, it felt like, was calling out how ridiculous it was, which I think is then why you had this boiling conspiracy or whatever, that there had to be some kind of reason for why. And, people latch on to the CAA connection here, which has been levied against ESPN before, most prominently, I would say, with Adrian Wojnarowski has kind of been accused of this, being himself a CAA client while also covering CAA clients in the NBA. Kirk Herbstreit, Booger McFarland, represented by CAA, Lane Kiffin, and almost every other big college football head coach represented by CAA. I don't know if you believe that, Ben, and I also feel like when we talk about that kind of thing, people like to dumb it down to that there was some kind of like word put in by Jimmy Sexton, who represents all these coaches, like you say this or else. When I think the answer can be a lot more simple, and something that I would actually believe, which is that if I'm Kirk Herbstreit, I don't want to shit on my I guess like indirect colleague, or maybe I've just gotten to know Lane a little bit better as a result of that connection, or whatever the case might be. I think that that's totally believable, just to have a more sympathetic view of somebody and be more liable to go to bat for them because of those connections, even if it's not some kind of like explicitly laid out quid pro quo that's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not so naive that I don't think that stuff happens. I agree with you. I don't think it's like a memo that goes out and says, okay, these are the talking points to defend Lane Kiffin for all CAA clients. I don't think that's how it happens. And I'm sure there's some of it factors in. It does, it would seem like too much of a coincidence, but I think if you just remove CAA from all of it, like, how would it look any different? It's like Nick Saban's going to defend a guy who he considers a protege. Rex Ryan is going to take the perspective of a coach 10 times out of 10. And as you alluded to, and as you flatly said, like, Kirk Herbstreit is a guy who typically takes the coach's perspective. Like, Kirk Herbstreit, these are the guys he works with on a weekly basis when he's calling their games and when he's doing College Game Day. I think one criticism you could certainly lob at College Game Day right now is that they have kind of lost the voice of the fan. I think I saw it last year with everything that went down with Ryan Day. It's like Ohio State's playing in this playoff game and Kirk Herbstreit's up there lecturing Ohio State fans about how dare you be upset they lost to Michigan. Like, I think there are a lot of things in College Game Day where the coverage slants very pro coach. And I will say Pat McAfee, to his credit, he is like the one voice who was kind of publicly calling for Lane Kiffin to stay at Ole Miss, or at least he was expressing that's what he wanted to see happen.
And on his show this morning, called out that it would have been goofy for Lane to remain the coach, despite what his network was putting out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think, in a post Lee Corso world, Pat McAfee has filled that void to a degree. Now he's not going to be a guy who like calls out Lane Kiffin or anything like that. And again, I don't necessarily know if he should, but I do think like, even if you just removed CAA from this entire equation, I think Kirk Herbstreit and Booger McFarland as an LSU alum and,
also a CAA client. Yeah.
Yeah. Nick Saban. I think all of their perspectives would be probably exactly the same. So if there's a conspiracy or not, I don't think it necessarily changes the outcome.
It's fair. And to your point, like this is a unique situation. So it's not like we can point to a previous example where this exact type of thing played out and say, well, Kirk said blank then, and now he's saying something more pro Lane now. It is different, but it just felt so unanimous and so contrary to if you were to pay attention to the Ross Dellingers or the actual people covering this stuff, Bruce Feldman, whatever. It was plainly not even a possibility that was going to happen. So even just that part of it, you're asking for hate on the coverage you're providing if you're talking about something that is just impractical and fantasy land. It's just like, what is it adding? It just feels so overly pro this person in a direction that isn't productive toward anything that's going to change. It's like, it'd be great if Luka Doncic was still a Maverick.
Right.
Okay, well, let's talk about the Anthony Davis trade because it happened already. He's a Laker, So, all right, last thing here. Marty Smith, I thought, just did a fantastic job from start to finish of this thing. He was embedded throughout the weekend for ESPN, covering the Egg Bowl and then covering the ins and outs of the negotiations and whatnot. And, maybe you could say that there's some things he could have asked that would have been more, direct from the Ole Miss fan standpoint or something. I'm sure there's Ole Miss fans who wish he had taken him to task or done whatever. Lane's a smart guy. He's very savvy about how to answer those questions and kind of take a posture in those interviews that's going to put the ball in his court. And I thought Marty Smith, with all that going on, did the best I think he could have done to actually get answers, get information and opinions from Lane to at least have something to go off of for Oxford faithful or national college football fans or anyone looking for answers on this whole situation. I just a salute for ESPN doing reporting that really kind of mattered and broke through.
Yeah, and I thought Marty did a great job. It helps that the subject was Lane Kiffin. Like, Lane Kiffin does not give bad interviews. Like, if this was Urban Meyer who was in that position, it would have been a very different interview with, terse responses and boilerplate answers. And instead you get Lane Kiffin up there accusing Mississippi State of breaking into Ole Miss's locker room and stealing Trinidad Chambliss's jersey. So I think the subject matter helped. But yeah, I thought Marty did a great job. I think it's funny you asked me about like where this ranks among Lane Kiffin controversies, because this felt like a very like 2011 type of story in terms of you have like an ESPN reporter embedded on this college campus with this head coach, like covering, not only the game, but then the decision. You had, my favorite part was today, you had every college football columnist, every national writer firing off their Lane Kiffin column. Everybody had a Lane Kiffin column. It reminded me of when I was first getting into the industry, and it's just like a very 2011 type of time where it felt like this like social media stuff was very secondary to like writing and reporting and all of the stuff that not only ESPN but all the national columnists and writers did everywhere. So I really enjoyed this story. It felt like a throwback.
And rare to have so much history with somebody, right, too, where everybody has an opinion. Kalen DeBoer, it got a very high profile job, and there were some very interesting ups and downs for the first season and a half here. But Nobody really has like
No.
a 20-year long opinion of what Kalen DeBoer is up to or how this matters for him. Whereas with Lane, it's like this throwback thing of he wears his heart on his sleeve. We know the sobriety, his father, the NFL, all these comings and goings, and it's one of those rare sports stories where there is like room for everybody to have an opinion, and all of it's kind of interesting.
Have you seen the E60 on Lane that they released? I think in September.
I haven't. Should I?
You should, although in retrospect, if you want to accuse ESPN of a coordinated rehabilitation project, maybe that's where you should start. But it's like an hour long, and it just goes through Lane's career and life, and it ends with him turning down Auburn to stay at Ole Miss at the end of last season. So it definitely needs a upgraded ending, because if you were to watch that, you would have thought there's no way this guy is ever leaving Oxford. But just the Lane Kiffin story in general, to your point about having like 20 years of history with somebody, like this guy was a coaching prodigy, had a really rapid rise, was the Oakland Raiders head coach at 31 years old, has an even quicker fall from grace, like just instantly as a pariah within the next 5 years, works his way back
to go to FAU.
Well, has to go to the Nick Saban coaches rehabilitation, clinic that he was running there in Tuscaloosa, works his way up to FAU, works his way up then to a big time, not a Power 5 and SEC program, but still like a secondary SEC program in Ole Miss. And because he is so successful, then he's afforded with the opportunity to leave again and become a villain all over again. Like, it's just like a Shakespearean story.
He's still not even that old.
Right.
He
he's
still
50
has
years
like the
old.
whole career ahead of him.
Yeah. So it's like
he could be in Baton Rouge for 20 years and win 3 championships still. And that chapter's yet to be written. It's crazy.
Yeah. We still have 2 or 3 more chapters with Lane Kiffin. So I recommend the E60, I think it's called The Many Lives of Lane Kiffin. It's a really cool thing, and his personality really shines through. But yeah, in retrospect, maybe that one is the one we should be side-eyeing a little more than what Booger McFarland is saying.
Well, I'll let you write that column in retrospect. Let's go quick here on Tom Brady, who, as the lead announcer on the NFL on Fox, has the privilege of calling the Thanksgiving game every year, one of the most high profile, having, he's already called the Super Bowl, but this is as big as it gets for the regular season. He didn't get Chiefs Cowboys, but he did get Packers Lions. And I texted you during the game, like, he's improved. He's improved in the mechanics of being an announcer, than I think is the position that I would take on it. He's always going to have his perspective, which I think it leans a little bit more nuts and bolts, X's and O's, kind of clock and game management stuff that you can take or leave. And there's not always openings to make a profound point on that stuff. But if you just compare it to the game number 1 that you reviewed for us in 2024, where there's long pauses, he doesn't have the timing down of working with Burkhardt and using the replay and talking to the producers and directors that he needs to talk to, just feels like a guy who is finally kind of melding the brilliance that we know he has with knowing how to broadcast. And, this feels like the stretch run of this season into the playoffs will kind of be like the coming out party for Tom Brady if he can keep that up.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's definitely benefited from just the spotlight is not as bright. Like, it's not, last year it felt like every game, like the game felt secondary to Tom Brady's on this call. Like, he seemed to overshadow the game. And I don't think that was even just a sports media thing. It felt that way for a lot of just like casual fans I know. So I think he's benefited from that. And then 2, I agree. I think he's gotten a lot better. Like, there was this stretch that I broke down in my column for Awful Announcing. It was late in the 3rd quarter where he was breaking down Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons was complaining to the refs about not getting a holding call. And Tom had some quick line about how Micah should know better than to complain because he's going to get held on every call because that's the only way to stop him. Then he compared Brian Branch, the Lions safety, to Rodney Harrison, which I love. I just love anytime, Tom gets in his bag and starts recalling the Patriots days and making player comparisons. I think that's the cool part of about having these high profile ex-players on these broadcasts. And then Jordan Love hit Dontavian Wicks for a big gain up the seam. And Tom broke it down in 15 seconds, like nuts and bolts. Like, this is what you do against this defense. He made a joke, like, I guess there was a commercial earlier in the year where Tom's talking about letting it rip. You got to just let it rip. And it's not that hard. And he recalled that line, but like didn't do it in a way that was overbearing. So like he displayed some comedy, like, and he was the main thing though was he was doing it all in these quick windows. Like he was getting in and out of the calls, and so I don't think he was doing that a year ago. I think it was his timing was a little more awkward last year. He definitely just seemed to be a little more cautious overall with what he was saying, and I think he's still, he's still not the best broadcaster at Fox. He's still not the number one broadcaster in the NFL, but I think he's definitely showing signs of improvement. Which, hey, if this is year 2 of a 10-year contract, that's a pretty good sign.
Where would you put him? Is he better than Romo, better than Herb Street, better than JJ Watt? Like, I think to me, Aikman is still the top. Olsen and Aikman, I think, are pretty unimpeachable there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think probably I would have Collinsworth next. Is Brady right below that? I mean, I don't know. Where do you have him?
I'd say I agree. Like, I think the conversation starts after, for me, the conversation starts after Olsen, Aikman, and I'd even put JJ Watt in there now. Like, if you were just to say, who do you want to hear call a game? Collinsworth and Romo are probably like just better analysts. They probably obviously have more reps. They're probably more mechanically sound. But if you're going to say like, hey, you have to watch this game, who do you want on the call? I'd rather Tom Brady be on the call than Tony Romo or Chris Collinsworth. So I'd put him there.
Anticipation factor kind of intrigue. Yeah, I think that's fair. Now, obviously, that's because we kind of geek out about this stuff. I think there are fans who just want more of somebody who fades into the background. I'm not. I guess that would probably be Collinsworth, although he has his own eccentricities, of course, that break through. But yeah, I think that's fair. I think that the next place Brady, the best guys get to that, I think, setting aside, Aikman with his kind of more authentic and oftentimes fairly critical approach that gets him plaudits, and Olsen being, so in on, these like trends and things like that, is like the best guys are second play-by-play analysts in the booth. They're so aware and so in tune and in touch with what's happening that they really are calling the game. They just happen to also be the guy that can break down the tape and whatever else they need to do, but they're going to point out a mistake or a miscue or a timeout or a flag or something and be really a second dude kind of, pointing things out and highlighting things for you in real time. Very few guys get there, and we'll see if Brady can, and obviously he is just in year 2, but I think that's kind of what's next. He has 2 Bears-Packers games, a Lions-Rams game, and a Bills-Eagles game the next month. Like, so, there's a lot there, and obviously week 18 is kind of a crapshoot. We don't know where they'll put him, but that next 4 is going to be strong. There's that Saturday night doubleheader that Fox has been doing once college football takes its break, and that's another high-profile one, and then obviously the playoffs. So we'll be talking a lot about Tom Brady once again, but I would agree. I think that the first couple months of the year, him just kind of not being in the spotlight at all just helps, and it helps him get reps. It helps Fox not have to hear about it and them not be thinking about it every game day. All right, quick hot mics to close ourselves out here, Ben. You tweeted over the weekend that Logan Paul, kind of right under our noses, just became a full-time WWE superstar, and that he was also not only more involved than people might realize, but also better than people might realize. And I need you to, we talked about the CAA allegations against ESPN and some kind of conspiracy. I think that this is Ohio bias. I think that you're just talking up your fellow Ohioan here. I need you to defend the take.
He's actually from the city I live in now too. So I have some Westlake, Ohio bias as well. No, he's a really good pro wrestler. I actually think most WWE fans would agree on that. Like whatever his brand of athleticism is, like in terms of like, he's big, but he's also athletic. He has some agility. He can fly. Like, he's a good pro wrestler. Now I think they put a lot of work into those matches that involve him. He's usually working with very, very talented wrestlers who help carry him. But his ability in the ring and obviously on the microphone too, where his, once he just totally embraced being a heel, his personality was tailor made for pro wrestling. I don't think that's in dispute. He though, like, I don't think people have realized he just does this full time. Like more pay-per-views than not, more shows than not, he is on. Like it used to be, he came in, he did 2 or 3 matches a year. And it was kind of, I think that's where a lot of fans kind of grew tired with him, where it's like, why is Logan Paul of all people taking up this high profile match on WrestleMania, on SummerSlam? Now it's like he typically doesn't take more than 3 months off at a time. And I don't think he's had like real time off from WWE since 2024. Like he's been at this throughout 2025. And so he was just involved in the Survivor Series main event. He's kind of getting entrenched in WWE's like main storyline. And I think he's in line for probably a championship angle here with CM Punk, which would be a really fun feud. So no, I have a lot of bias towards Logan Paul, but I think it's founded.
The Paul brothers vandalized the mall down from my home during the COVID-19 pandemic. So shout out to them for that. I appreciate that Logan is at least more honest with himself, that he just wants to be a pro wrestler, whereas his brother just is one, but in everything but name. So I think the authenticity is well appreciated. Speaking of storylines, last thing here. I'm going to Monday Night Raw in Glendale, Arizona tonight. What can I expect?
Yeah, so you picked a good one because it's coming off Survivor Series. And so Survivor Series is one of the big 4 pay-per-views, premium live events. And so typically the Raw after those shows are big shows because they kind of reset everything heading into the next big show, which will be the Royal Rumble in January, which obviously kicks off everything heading into WrestleMania. So the main event of Survivor Series was a War Games match, where the important part was the team involving Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes and CM Punk lost. There was a mystery man who got involved. Maybe you'll find out who the mystery man was tonight. But then Roman Reigns kind of showed some disdain for Cody Rhodes. So they're kind of teasing those two are going to run back their rivalry. And then CM Punk, I would imagine you might get a kickoff to the CM Punk versus Logan Paul feud, which I would imagine is going to take you to the Royal Rumble. So that's what I'd be looking for. But yeah, it should be a good show.
All right. Well, shout out to WWE for making that happen. And I'll report back whenever I'm back on the show later this week. Thank you to everybody who caught up with the Lane Kiffin drama and Tom Brady and Logan Paul with us here today. Hit subscribe or follow if you haven't already. We'll be back live with you 2 more times this week as we power through the stretch run of the football season. Enjoy your Monday, folks. We'll catch you next time.